opinion or feelings about the proposal. And at the end of the outline that I'm going to follow, opinion or feelings about the proposal. And at the end of the outline that I'm going to follow, we'll have plenty of time for questions, and I want you to feel free to ask any of those questions. If you did not get an opinion or feelings about the proposal, and at the end of the outline that I'm going to follow, we'll have plenty of time for questions, and I want you to feel free to ask any of those questions. If you did not get an outline coming in, they're on the table just out, and we're going to be real informal. If you want to walk out there and get you an outline, be sure to do that. Opinion or feelings about the proposal. And at the end of the outline that I'm going to follow, we'll have plenty of time for questions, and I want you to feel free to ask any of those questions. If you did not get an outline coming in, they're on the table just out, and we're going to be real informal. If you want to walk out there and get you an outline, be sure to do that. And or at least get you one when you leave, look back at it. I would encourage you, if at any time during the discussion tonight or the explanation tonight that something popped up in your mind, if you've got something to write with, just jot yourself a note on that, and at the time of the questions, we'll entertain those. If you're not comfortable asking a question publicly, if you want to just write it down and send it up here, I'll be glad to read it off and then try to address it. So we'll go ahead and get started with the outline. And again, the purpose tonight is I want you to be 100% informed about what we're considering and what's been proposed and all the process involved in this, and try to get you well informed. Before I get into the actual, I just call it meat and potatoes of the proposal and all the factors that go into it, I want to explain something to you and hopefully to prevent misunderstandings and misconceptions about what has taken place so far. If you'll go ahead and pull up that first slide, Ms. McMahon. On your outline, you'll notice the first thing I put down there is the time frame. And this thing has moved very quickly, and there's a reason for that. And I want you to be able to see at least the logic in that reason. And I'm going to back up time a little bit and explain to you how this kind of unfolded. I know you're probably fairly aware of the law or not of the law in Arkansas that any time the school district drops below average daily membership, attendance or enrollment of 350, then they fall under the constraints of Act 60, which was passed back in the spring of 2004. It was called the second extraordinary session of 2003, but it was into the spring of 2004. And basically what it says, if you fall below 350 for 2 consecutive years, then the following year is your last year. Even if your enrollment goes back up over 350, if you've been under 350 for 2 consecutive years, that third year, you're out. I think the only allowance there is if you have an enrollment burst, a boost of over 25%. Well, of 350 kids, that would be over 80. And you know, for us small schools in Southwest Arkansas, that's just not likely to happen. So when a school gets down around, school district gets down around 350, they know they're getting in danger of that Act 60 and having to look at a consolidation or an annexation. And I think this year is the first year that Bradley has dropped under 350. They're right around 348, 349 somewhere, but they're under 350. 350, I just always thought it's just a magical number. The state determined that was a significant number, so if you're over 350, you're okay. If you're under 350, you're not. That's what we live by. Bradley dropped below 350, and when they did, Mr. Moore, their superintendent, contacted me and said that they were right under 350, and he was going to talk with his board to find out what the board wanted to do, which at their point in time right now, they unlike the way we found ourselves back in 2004, we found ourselves, after that law was passed, we had until May the 1st, and that was the absolute deadline. We didn't have another year or 2 years or possibly even 3 years. We had that, and that happened to all schools that had been under 350 for 2 years in a row. I don't even remember last year was above 350. It's been so long before that. But Brad, he contacted me, and this was somewhere around the first week of March. But he was going to bring it up at his board meeting, and Bradley meets on the second Monday of March. So they met, and he called me on the following day or two after that and said the board authorized him to take the first steps, which involves the board president and the superintendent meets with the board president, superintendent of contiguous schools. And a contiguous school district is one whose border touches your border. And school districts contiguous to Bradley are Fouke, Lafayette County, and Emerson-Taylor. If you remember back in 2004 when we were going through it, I talked with Bradley, I talked with Lafayette County, I talked with Magnolia, and I talked with Emerson. We had 4 schools that were contiguous to us. And when he called me, he said his board wanted them to start talking with the area schools to find out what interest there were, or interest there was with the contiguous schools. I told him, I said, well, that'll work out good. My board meeting is this Thursday night. They met on Monday night. We met on Thursday night, I think it was March 14th. And I said, I'll bring it up to the board and see if they're interested in talking. I brought it up to the board. The board said, sure, we need to talk. And so we set a meeting, and if you recall, the following week was spring break. Looking back at it now, I wish we had not skipped spring break in that time frame, but keeping in mind, this time frame you see up there, I'll tell you when I discovered that time frame. Remember I told you that when we consolidated back in 2004, we had a May 1st deadline. And the reason it has changed since then was back in 2004 because there were so many schools in the state of Arkansas that were affected by that Act 60, and so many schools that had to meet before the state board. The state board elected to meet every Monday for about 6 weeks. Now they only meet once a month. So, and you have to get your petition in 30 days prior to the meeting. And you'll see in a minute the absolute deadline on when a petition had to be filed. Now, I did not know this deadline until a little bit later on in this process. So we go through spring break. We come back the week of March the 25th or 26th, somewhere in there. And we had a meeting. When I say we, the board president, Mr. Herring, and I, had a meeting set up with Mr. Moore and their board president, Mr. Early, for that Thursday night, which would have been March the 29th, 28th, somewhere in there. And everything was set fine. And then we had a coach over at Emerson whose father died. But many of you in here probably know Coach Hicks. His father passed away, and Mr. Herring, our board president, was raised with they were neighbors, grew up with these families, and he felt obligated, and rightfully so, all of us feel the same way, to be at their visitation. So we had to cancel our board meeting, our board president, and our meeting with Bradley representatives on that Thursday night, and we scheduled it just as quickly as we could on Monday night, April the 1st. So that's the first time we actually sat down with Mr. Moore and their board president. And after the discussion, we talked about all the things and talked about our schools and things that are important, and which I'm going to go over all of that in just a little bit. Mr. Herring and I both agreed that this was, it offered something that we really seriously need to consider. It was at that point that I contacted the school's attorneys to find out more about the process and what we had to do, because in my mind I'm thinking we have until May 1st. So we've got a couple of weeks at least left in this, or 3 weeks to get this done. And that's when he sent me this timeline. I got the timeline on April the 1st. We had 3 days for the board to take local action. If we had not met last Thursday night, and in addition to that, our normal meeting, and we had talked about this at our March meeting, that if the meeting went well and something we want to consider, we'd put it on the agenda for our April meeting, which would be this Thursday night, April the 11th. And I had one of the board members had called me and will be out of town this week due to a workshop for their job that they go to. Going to be at training for 3 days because I'll be able to be at that board meeting, and asked me would I be able to reschedule the meeting because that board member really wanted to be there in the discussion about annexation or consolidation. So we were going to have to move the board meeting anyway. My only decision to make was, do I move it up a week to the week of April the 1st through the 4th, or move it back a week, which would be next week? Well, if we had waited till after April the 4th, there would be no need for this meeting, because that would be past the absolute deadline that the board has to act to approve an agreement or a petition to file to the state board. So we decided, in talking with board members, we decided to go ahead and have the meeting and execute the paperwork so that we could at least then have the option. Because after April the 4th, if you'll notice on there, by law, the first publication had to go in no later than the 6th, and that's a Saturday. The Banner News does not print on Saturday. So that meant April 5th, which was last Friday, was the absolute last day they could actually run the publication, and we couldn't meet till the 4th. So you see how crunched up the time was getting for us. So in order to meet that deadline, we met on the 4th and approved the documents, and we ran our first notification in the paper on the 5th. I have that copy. They are to run the second publication, which you have to do one publication in two separate weeks, and of course Sunday being the first day of the week, anytime after Sunday would be the second week. And to at least, for us to be legal to pursue this, if the board chooses to pursue it. Now, I may forget to mention this later, so I'm going to make sure I mention it now. This is not in stone. It's not a snowball that's been pushed off a hill that you can't stop. The board, the paperwork, although it's been executed, has not been filed. It has to be filed no later. Bring up that bottom part. Go ahead and bring it up. It has to be filed by April 12th, which is this Friday. If for some reason the board decides we do not want to do this, then we'll never file the paperwork. And then even after the paperwork is filed, we have 1 month between now and May the 13th, when the state board meets, to withdraw the petition if the board chooses to withdraw. And we will have a board meeting between now and May the 13th. So I want to share that with you so that you will realize that, and I agree, it was rushed and it was quick, but if we had not done that, then we would not be allowed to even consider an annexation or consolidation with Bradley for this next school year. And in a little while, when I get to the parts about why I think, the positive, the negatives, the good, the bad, you'll just have to decide for yourself whether you think this would be a good action to take or not a good action. And one other thing I must say, the only authority on granting the petition is the state board. This is just a request. The state board makes the decision. And I have watched, over the years, I have watched two parties, two different school districts, eagerly desiring to merge together to be denied by the state board. I've watched school districts where one of them wanted to go in with this school, and this other school saying, we don't want you, and the board putting them with that school. And I've seen school districts where this school didn't want these, this school didn't want these, and the state board still put them together. So I share that with you so you'll know, and I could give you specific instances of those, the particular schools. But I want you to know that even if you had 100% of everybody in every community and up there with banners and rallying, please do this, it's still left up to the state board to decide whether they will grant the petition or not. So nothing is a done deal until the state board acts on the petition, provided that no one decides to withdraw their petition, which would be Emerson-Taylor District, or Bradley could also choose to withdraw it as well. So I hope I've covered this timeline and why the board had to move so quickly last week to meet this time frame. The next thing on there, some of the questions been asked me is, what's the difference between an annexation and a consolidation? The legal description of it by the state of Arkansas is when two or more school districts go together and form a brand new school district, that's consolidation. That's what Emerson and Taylor did back in 2004. And annexation is when an existing school district takes in another school district and that other school district becomes part of them. It's not a new school district. Whatever your rules and policies and regulations and student handbooks and personnel policies and all that governs your school district, if you annex another school district into you, they take your policies, your rules, your regulations, your handbooks. Now, I would be the first one to say, to me, common sense would say, if you got a better idea than I do, I'd be crazy to stick with my bad idea just because it's mine. So I would definitely, even though we wouldn't be required to, and I'm going to speak a lot from this point of view, if an annexation takes place, I would certainly want to look at all the rules and regulations and policies and see if they have a better idea than we do on some things and some operational things. But that's the difference between an annexation and a consolidation. This proposal is an annexation. Okay, you got it up there. I had hoped to put the actual annexation agreement, but the print was so small, I don't believe you would have seen it. I'm going to do my best. Well, I'm going to give it to somebody else that's more of a 21st century person than I am tomorrow to try to get this the actual agreement and the actual petition posted on our website if you want to look at it word for word. But I'm going to give you the highlights of it. And again, if I say something during this that sparks a thought in your mind, try to jot stuff down in notes so you can ask a question a bit later. And if I say something to confuse you, be sure to ask in a little while for me to clarify it. In the annexation agreement, it's a 3-page document that has 13 bullets. It starts out like most legal things, whereases and therefores and all that stuff. It basically says that since Bradley School District and Emerson-Taylor School District feel like it'd be in the mutual best interest to annex, then the following agreement we enter into. The first thing that is in the agreement is the effective date. If the state board, if we file the petition and the state board approves it, it will be effective July the 1st this year, the 13-14 school year. All right? That's simple enough, no more explanation. The name of the school district, and I'm going to explain this. The Emerson-Taylor School District at ETSD is what we're called now. We would change the name as the Emerson-Taylor School District. And that was my suggestion. And I'll tell you why. Don't have to. If they want to annex into us, it'd be really easy to say, this is the way it is. If you want to come, come. It's been my experience in working with people that if they feel like they've been valued and feel like they've been treated fairly, they're a little bit easier to work with. I remember back in 2004, Taylor was needing a partner. Emerson did not have to consolidate at that time. They still had some time. It could have been easily, sure, but we're going to erase Taylor from everything that you have over there, except the building. There won't be any documents. You won't be anything with Taylor. It'll just be Emerson. And they had the wisdom what that is, it's a statement to a community. We don't think very much of you because we don't even want your name. So at my suggestion, I suggest the board, if we do this, I would sure want to include their name in the district because then that makes them feel a part of it. And that's just my philosophy about it, and that was my suggestion. They keep their mascots, Bradley Bears, their colors, just like we've done, no different. The Emerson Pirates, colors and mottos and traditions, and Taylor Tigers, colors, mottos, traditions, none of that changes. All of that stays the same. The next, the Board of Directors. We currently, Emerson-Taylor School District currently has a 5-member board. Bradley has a 7-member board. They would be given 2 positions on a new 7-member board. Our current 5 board members would remain on the board. We would not lose any board seats. They would be given 2. And this is referred to as the interim board. And the interim board will serve for a little over from July of 2013 until the 2014 election. Normally I'd say until September of 2014, but there's legislation going on in Little Rock right now that would change the school election to the general election. And if that passes and the governor signs it becomes law, then we'll no longer have school elections in September. That'll move down to the November election. And I don't know how that's going to end up, but I do know there will be an election in 2014. So whichever is September or November, wherever it ends up, that's when the next board election would actually be for board members. And I'll explain in a little bit about how that will play out. Well, I'll go ahead and explain it now. In 2014, we plan to retain all 7 positions, but due to Arkansas law, we will have to rezone, and we've been through that before. We just got through with the rezoning due to the census. Every 10 years, you do a census, and school districts have to rezone after the census. And so we did that in, I think, 2012. This is last year, I believe. And we'd have to rezone for the election in 2014. And board zones are determined by your voting age population. So it's not a set number that the old Emerson district would get X number and Taylor X number and Bradley X number. The state looks at it as just one big district. And you have to break it up into 7 pieces of pie. And each piece of pie has to fall within certain guidelines. You can't have one zone have far more population in it than another zone. It has to be, I think, plus or minus 5%. And just like we have now, not all of our zones are clearly what we used to think of as old school district lines. One of our zones now is in both in Emerson and Taylor. Those old, it spills over, and I'm sure there'll be some of that because you have to kind of gerrymander those lines a little bit until you finally get the numbers right. And they have a person that does that in Little Rock with a computer program that I guess is all based on the GPS stuff that they do. And it's just trial and error. You move a line from this street to this street, or from this section line to another section line, and it starts pulling in the data as far as how many people live there, and it'll give you the number, and you keep doing it until you finally get 7 zones that meets the voter laws. And then all 7 of those would have to run. And as many people that live in those zones that desire to run, just like any school board election, if that zone is up for re-election, anyone that's a legal resident of that zone certainly has the right to run for the board. The next one. In the agreement that, this is very typical of annexation, the superintendent of the school that's receiving the school remains a superintendent if they choose. If you recall back when we consolidated with Emerson in 2004, the Emerson superintendent at that time, Mr. Farr, was retiring, and it made ours really easy. That's not the case with this one. And again, typical of annexations, the receiving school superintendent, if they are on contract and remain, they serve as superintendent. The superintendent of the annexing in district is usually named to another position, oftentimes deputy superintendent or assistant superintendent. And that's what in the agreement we've agreed Mr. Moore will serve as an assistant superintendent. And one of the questions that may come up a little bit later is what will be the roles of of the individuals. And that's one of those I have to say at this time, I really cannot answer that question. We have job descriptions in our handbooks for every position in school except an assistant superintendent, because we never had one. So we're going to have to sit down and define those roles and responsibilities and create that job description before I can tell you for sure. The question been asked, will Mr. Moore be assigned to this campus or multiple campuses? Again, at this time, I don't know. But one thing about it, he has a contract with the Bradley School District, and as you'll see in a minute about employment, we honor, by law, you have to honor contracts, and we'll go on with those contracts. The next one, all employees of the Bradley School District that's employed as of July 1, 2013. And we're in the process. Matter of fact, we did at our board meeting, we rehired our staff, and their contracts renewed for this next year, and I'm sure Bradley has done that as well. So if they've been rehired, they have a job next year. All of our people have a job next year. And I certainly want to make that very clear, that no one's employment is in jeopardy in an annexation, especially the direction that we're going to try to maintain and the structure that we're going to try to maintain. No one's job would be in jeopardy unless it was going to be in jeopardy anyway. And especially in this part of the state, when you have declining enrollment, at some point, if you have X number of teachers, employees that's serving 350 children, and you drop down over a period of time to 300 children, at some point you've got too many people employed. And that's just one of the things that we have to deal with in declining enrollment is a reduction in staff, and we do that from time to time. But there's no question or danger of anyone from Emerson-Taylor or Bradley losing their job for this next year. Now after that, after the first year, it's subject to review. Again, if we maintain the structure that we planned, it's going to be very little change. Now, keep in mind, most annexations where you actually close campuses and bring people into a place, there are a lot of contracts for 1 year, but after that, you have big changes. That's not our plan, and that's not something that we would do. School facilities. This is in our agreement. We fully intend to operate all 3 campuses. And if you don't remember anything else, when you walk out tonight and you engage in conversation with your friends, and the question comes up, are they going to close our campus? The answer is no. There will not be a campus closed in this annexation. And I'll go a little farther to say this. Unless the state of Arkansas sends a National Guard down and orders me to close the campus, I will not close the campus. If it's a local decision to close the campus, that's my Gideon's fleece. I'm done. I will not be party to the closure of any campus. So I don't know how to make that any plainer for anyone that wonders, is this a backdoor attempt at closing campus? We will not close the campus. I was asked a question by a person at Emerson a day or so ago, said, well, how will this affect us? And I said, well, how much has it affected you for the last 9 years? And if you've been in Emerson or in Taylor, going to those schools, it really hasn't changed a whole lot for you. It's changed a little bit for myself and for the school board and for Cherie. We're the ones that travel back and forth. We know that road, even though I did run into a pine tree one night, we know that road pretty good. But no, we are not planning and have no desire to close any campus. I do not want to move the first child any place other than where they are and where they want to go to school. Millage rates, taxes. Now I've got everybody's attention. In 2013, this year, whenever the school election will be, just as it is every year, there's always the school tax rate is on the ballot. Whether you're asking for an increase or not asking for an increase, it's always on the ballot. You vote for it or against it every year. Our current millage rate Well, that's not on here, but you got that. Our current millage rate for Emerson-Taylor is 37.4. Bradley's is 32. What will be on the tax, will be on the ballot this year's election for taxes will be 37.4. If it passes, and let me make sure you understand this. If annexation takes place, then their votes are counted in with our votes. Remember, if we annex them in, we're just one big school district, and we'll have different voting sites. They'll vote wherever they vote at Bradley. You know, sometimes we vote here, sometimes at the City Hall, at Emerson, in the cafeteria, sometimes City Hall, wherever we hold the election. But you'll vote. But they'll put them all into one count. And just like any other vote, the majority wins. And here's Arkansas law on a tax. If it passes, then it's whatever that ballot says. 37, in our case, it would be 37.4. If it fails, it goes back to what it was last year, which was 37.4. So pass or fail, your taxes will not change. Now, your tax rate, I'm going to be honest with everything I say. Your tax rate will not change. If your taxes goes up, it's because your assessed valuation goes up. Now, I don't control how many boats you buy, or if your house goes up in value. That's the equalization board values that. The only thing I have to do with is what I recommend the board we set our tax rate at. So if your taxes go up, it's not because that the school board voted your taxes up. Your tax rate will stay the same, 37.4. What about the people from Bradley? If it passes, they pay 37.4. They will see about a 5.4 mil increase, which sounds like a lot of money. I mean, it's really not. I know that's relative, though. If it fails, they stay at 32. We keep paying 37.4. I had this conversation, and I was very open with the board president from Bradley. I'm of the opinion, if you're going to join a deer camp to hunt on their land, you pay their lease, whatever the membership is. If you're going to come in with us, I want the people from Bradley to support it. They need to pay the same rate we pay. But, you know as well as I do, when you step in that booth and you close the curtain, it's nobody but you and God. And y'all will be the only two that know how you vote. So, I don't know what they will do on their vote. And I do know one thought out here sometimes with people is, if it's not going to make any difference, well, I hadn't got time to go up there. But it does make a difference. So all I can do is encourage you to turn out to vote. But I hope the Bradley people, if we enter in this annexation, I hope the Bradley people will see it the way I do, that if we're going to be a part of them, then we need to pay the same rate they pay. Because once you annex, with the exception of your carryover balances, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute, with the exception of your carryover balance, all of your future money goes into one pot. So all of their tax collections and state aid and our tax collections and state aid will all come into one pot, and we pay bills from that one pot, with the exception of some categorical funds. We pay all of our bills from that one pot. So that's why I want everyone to contribute to that pot at the same rate. But I can't control that part of it. Other than I can walk in that booth and cast my vote. But I want you to walk out of here tonight and know that whether we annex Bradley or not, it is not going to affect your tax rate. The next thing on there, I'm going to get that. There's a couple. There will be no board election. I think I've already covered it. In 2013, the next board election will be 2014. That gives the interim board a year to go, because there are hurdles and bumps and problems along the way. It's not always perfectly smooth. But it gives that board time to make this transition work. The petition filing date, I've already talked about that, is April the 12th. That's this Friday. And that's the deadline. There's a statement on the agreement about school choice, and it simply says that we will abide by Arkansas law on school choice. If you ask me right now what that means, I can't really tell you because it's being litigated or it's being discussed in the legislature right now. There's a new bill has been introduced. Well, there's been several of them, but there's one of them that has passed the Senate. It has not passed the House yet, and it has to pass the House, has to go to the governor, either for his signature or he can delay 10 days if it becomes law. But until that happens, I really can't tell you if school choice has changed. Once that changes, I can tell you a little bit better. There's a statement in there about an entire agreement. Again, I think it's just legal lawyer type language. There's a statement in there about concerning paper copies. Bradley has executed their paper copy. We've executed our paper copy. Their board president, secretary signatures on one. Our board president and secretary signatures on one. Together, they form a legal document. I think that's what that means. And then the last statement in the agreement just says that the school district will comply with all laws, rules, and regulations set by the state of Arkansas. But we do that anyway. We don't have a choice about it. So that's the annexation agreement. There's another document that is the actual petition, and it's a repeat of the agreement. So I told Ms. McMahon there's no need of us putting that on again. I'm going to put these on the website. You can actually pull them up and look at them and read them word for word, but you'll see that all the petition is just a restatement of what our agreement, annexation agreement would be. All right, now let's get down to, in your outline there, I think number 6, major considerations. The most valid question is this a good move or not? And trust me when I say that's the decision that board members and I, and hopefully I want you as well to be thinking about. We certainly want to do what's in our best interest. And I have no desire to create headaches for myself. If this was a major bad move, I would never even brought it up to the school board. So what are the important considerations for one district annexing another district? I just went back to what how states evaluate schools and what states look at. And our single most important focus at the Emerson-Taylor School District is academics. You've heard that from me time and time again. I know that we value academics above everything else. On the student safety, obviously, but academics. We're going to, just like we're not playing any ball games tonight or tomorrow night because our kids are taking tests. We want them, and we know y'all are going to make them get to bed early, and you're going to feed them good, and you're going to encourage them. We're doing everything we can so our kids will do well. Now, I don't want to get into a big debate about these tests and all that. It's the law of the land to take tests. So when this came up to me, my first thought was, where are you academically? And I'm going to show you this report, and don't go too quick. The lady that designed this report, and this thing's called an ESE accountability report, ESEA accountability report. The lady that designed it from the University of Arkansas, she's a PhD, and I've been to 2 of her workshops explaining how to interpret all this data. I sat through 4 hours of all this data, and there's a lot of this I haven't got a clue what it means. But the most important part of it, I do. This one is for Taylor Elementary. We look at what kind, the state has categories that they classify a school. Now, I'm not talking about a district now, I'm talking about an individual school, like Taylor Elementary is one school, Taylor High School is one school, Emerson Elementary, Bradley Elementary. These are all schools, not districts. When we look at a school, the state says you're either an achieving school or a school that needs improvement. And what defines a school that needs improvement is it's just like a high jumper trying to jump over the bar. If you knock the bar off, you didn't quite clear it, then they say you need to improve. That's what a needs improvement in a school is. Then there's one on down. That's kind of like, don't put this on your website, somebody get mad at me. That's like if you run up there and jump over the bar, but you trip and fall in the pit. That's a focus school. And a priority school, even lower, you don't even make it to the pit on the high jump. That's the 4 classifications of schools. So we always strive to be an achieving school. Here's Taylor Elementary, and I'm going to go through. You see, achieving. They look at it they look at it in. Make sure you test the right number, your attendance rates, and all those things. But the main thing we look at is literacy and math. So that's Taylor Elementary. We're an achieving school in both of those. Go to the next one. I think Taylor High School. All right, pull it up. Come out, the graduation rate was okay, come on down, literacy, achieving, come on down. Math, achieving, all right. Go to Emerson Elementary. All right, achieving school in literacy, come on down. That need improvement, I'll explain, there's a conflict with that, I think it's safe on that part up there, but we're needing school improvement in math, and I'm not going to get into the details of this. It's something in Arkansas, sometimes highly educated people can do some things that don't make sense. And we have things set up in Arkansas that now you can have a school over here that scores at this level and be an achieving school, and a school over here that scores 5 points above them and be a needs improvement school. And it's based on what your own individual scores were back in 2011. And again, I'll try to cover that this fall when we do our back to school and we'll get our new test scores out. But Emerson School, we needed to come up our score. You see, we scored 87.9. They needed to be 92. Missed it by about 5 points. I mean, those are high scores when you look at what most schools in the state are scoring on the proficiency level. Go to Emerson High School. Graduation rate, of course, that'll change with this next group coming up. And that's why we're so hard on kids trying to get them to graduate, and parents keeping them in school. They were achieving school in literacy and a needs improved school in math. Missed it by about 13 points. All right? Go to Bradley Elementary. Now, I want to show you our scores to give you a frame of reference when we look at Bradley scores. Because I said one of the things I look at on considering them is where are they academically. Here's Bradley Elementary. Come on down. Achieving school in literacy, 90% performance. Achieving school in math, 92% performance. Outstanding score. So that gives me confidence that, and looking back at, in high schools, it's a little tougher. Looking at scores, if I was asked the question, would you prefer to have your achieving school in elementary or high school? My answer would be I'd rather prefer both. But if I had to pick one, I would prefer it to be elementary because now you've got those achieving schools of kids that are going to be moving on up, and maybe some of the kids that are struggling at the high school level are going to move on out. So, I mean, it's kind of like a ball team. When you see those really good players young, you think that's what's coming up as opposed to the other way. Bradley High School. Come on down. They need graduation rate, same as Emerson. They need improvement in literacy, and they were about 9 points off their target, which is not real bad, from 60 to 69. And I told you the targets are different for different schools. And now their math, they were about 9 points off in math, so they need improvement. Bradley needs to improve. I mean, and my principal will tell you this: no matter where we are, we always improve. If we could ever get them all to 100%, we'll say, okay, we've reached the plateau. We don't need to improve anymore, but we know that's not likely. But I want you to see that it's not annexing with them should not be based on some thought that academically it will harm us because they won't. Because even if we're one district, we're still independent schools, and we do whatever programs are needed for that school. If we need to improve a reading program or math program here, but we don't need it over here, we put it where we need it. All right? Also, if you notice something else I'll look at is where are you financially? appreciate the comment on Facebook that I was a tight superintendent. And now that the cat's out of the bag, you just thought I was tight before, just wait. Financing, I look at that every day. You know, I'm a believer in this. You can throw all the money in the world at a problem and not solve the problem. But most of the things that we want to do in a school all cost money. There's not many of them free. So, money is important. And this, go all the way back up the top so you'll see what this is. My board looks at this every month. This is it's called a detailed statement of changes in fund balance, and basically what it is, it's a financial snapshot of where you are in this particular month. That period 9, I think that's March. You started July, 1, 2, 3, on out, I think 9 is March. So this is Bradley's financial condition at the end of the month of March. If you'll come back now, don't get, stop a second. When you see a negative number, like that negative $1.8 million, that might would scare you to death. No, what that is, if you look at the number under it, $4 million, that's an outscan, and that's Arkansas Public School Computer Network system. This is an accounting system. They had us change from a fund 2000 to a 2001, and it's a way that they, and if you were a bookkeeper, if Miss Will Hart, she may not have come because I told her to ask me a tough financial question, I'm going to refer to you. But the state is making us transfer money from one fund number to another, so one will look negative or look really bad, but it's just a negative if money been moved out of the fund into another fund. And so if you got, I would love to have a personal financial statement that in one pocket I had negative 1.8 million, but I had 4.5 million in the other. I'd be tickled to death. Let's come down to and go across to the right, where it says total operating fund. The operating fund is the meat and potatoes of the school district. And if you look at the balance, that's their balance at the end of the month of March is $2.79 million. And I know, and I've looked, they have less than $1.5 million in debt. So you could take their carryover balance and pay off every bit of their debt and still have over $1 million. That's pretty sound finances. There may be another superintendent state higher than I am. To compare to us, our March report, where they have 2.79, we have right at 3.7. But we actually have more debt because we built a new high school, we built a new gym, we built a multi-purpose building, we put parking everywhere, and just like I said, stuff like that that we like costs money. But we're in great shape financially. We have one thing that we do have the benefit of is a very strong tax base. Our assessed valuation for our school district is in excess of $70 million. So one meal in our district will generate about over $70,000 of revenue. So we have the ability, if it ever became necessary, to raise a substantial amount of money quickly, if the voters wanted to go for a tax increase in rate in order to raise a lot of money fast or something, we have that ability. The financial advisors do what they call a tax debt ratio, and matter of fact, they told us, y'all need to borrow more money, and I said, no, we don't need to borrow any more money. We just want to live off what we got. So I want you to see, Bradley is in excellent financial shape. So 2 legs of the stool that I look at to evaluate the condition of a school or a district is, what does your academics look like? What's your money look like? And the third one are your facilities. And I know a lot of you in here are familiar with Bradley. Some of you are from Bradley. Some of you play ball over there. Their buildings are very similar to Taylor buildings. Age, condition. They don't have a old 1940 wood structure, or like we had in 1932, that old white building out here, wood structure, that I think Miss Bland fell through the floor one time in that building. They don't have that kind of building. There is no expectations, and I've talked with Mr. Moore and talking with their board president, they have no expectation for any need of construction in the near future, because and for those of you that follow basketball, they just built roughly $2.5 million gymnasium and only borrowed $1 million to do it. They pulled some of their own money out to pay the balance off. So their facilities are in good shape. The last thing I put on there as consideration is the climate. And I don't mean the type of we're all in the same climate. I mean, what's the feeling of the people? If the majority of their people are dead set against it and make that known, or if the majority of our people are dead set against it, my recommendation to the board is just withdraw it and don't do it. Because I want everyone to feel like this is good, that it's a smart thing to do, that that it improves or helps all parties. And I don't know if you consider this mine or not, but I'll tell you how I kind of came about in thinking of this. When after we met with Mr. Early and them and Mr. Herring and I agreed that they've got a good perspective. They're not coming in saying, well, this is how we want it. It was very much, we're coming in with you and whatever you want, that's what we're willing to do. I asked myself the question, if back in 2004, what if Emerson had said no? We probably would have consolidated with Bradley, because that was pretty much our second school on the list. And their conditions in 2004 were not nearly as good as they are now, as far as their academics and their finances. And obviously the facilities they've built buildings since then. And I also thought, how important is another small community school? We've been fortunate. We've been one of the few schools or districts in this state that have consolidated and been able to keep our campuses in our communities. And we've made that investment. And we've put buildings. If we were going to close campuses, we would not have engaged in the building projects that we've done the last 4 or 5 years. So we've obviously made a commitment to keeping our campuses in separate communities. And that's the same thing that we would be trying to help Bradley do, is let them keep their school in their community. And I jotted this down, another 1A athletic school, and what that means. I was thinking the other day, when I became the superintendent, we played Bright Star, we played Emmett, we played Delight, we played Waldo, we played McNeil, we played Walker, we played Mount Holly, we played Union, we played Huddy. None of those exist anymore. And at the regional level, we played Wicks and Vanco. In 2 years, they're not in our classification anymore. They no longer exist as those independent schools. They're the new Cossatot River High School. We're disappearing, 1A schools are. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, I mean, it doesn't matter. This is true. I'm on the AAA board, and we had a petition from a school this last year, petition to go from 1A to 2A. You know, it's usually the other way around. As you lose kids, you go down. Well, they were a 1A school, but they asked us, would we let them, and more than likely, I mean, again, I don't know what's going to happen to Stevens, but I know they're in a numbers trouble, and I also know that Kirby is awfully close. If they're not at 350 right now, too. So, and there's a couple more 1A schools around. But I completely lost my train of thought. I'm talking about something important too. Oh, AAA board. This school that petitioned to go up to 2A. If they had not petitioned to go up 2A and had remained in 1A, they would be in our conference, not our region, our conference, a regular conference school that we would play. And they're Dermot, and they're on the Mississippi River. They are the only 1A school east of Emerson. And Emerson's not even in central Arkansas. Emerson's in southwest Arkansas. They're the only 1A school east of Emerson and south of I-40. Only one. Most of the 1A schools are in North Arkansas. We're disappearing tearing down here. I know that's not an important consideration, but if we lose another 1A school, you know, we're just gonna find it, I guess just have to have intramurals, we'll run out of people to play. And, but those are some things also I thought about. I hope I've shared a lot of information with you, and if you've had fears that, boy, I'm afraid it's not a good, but, oh, I left out one little, oh, I forgot that. I left out one little thing, incentive funds. Can you imagine me forgetting that far down? On their finances, man, somebody should call that to my attention. Whoever takes in Bradley, and I know they talked with Falk, I really don't think that's doable because Falk is over 30 miles away from them. And if you did have to transport kids, they'd have to go over that Red River Bridge, 4 or 5 buses twice a day. I don't think the state board would do that, but you never know. And obviously the other one that they'll consider would be Lafayette County, Lewiston Stamp. And it's actually farther from Bradley to the Stamps High School campus than it is from Bradley to Taylor. But since we're not even talking about transporting kids to any campus, to me that's not even a factor. But whoever gets Bradley under Arkansas's current is called voluntary consolidation or annexation. There's a funding mechanism for it, and whoever gets them this next year will receive $1.8 million. No strings attached. Unrestricted. Spend it however you want to spend it wherever you want to spend it. Any campus that that district has. And then the second year, in the 14-15 year, you receive 50% of that amount, which would be $0.9,900,000. So altogether, the receiving school is going to get about $2.7 million. Now, from a financial standpoint, as a superintendent, I can tell you, it takes a long time for a small school to save that kind of money, to build up that kind of money. So it's hard for me to look past that. But the decision does not need to be based on it's just a financial gain for you. It needs to be based on does it bring in all the factors. And we've been able to do some good things with Emerson-Taylor. We've shared some staff back and forth. They've worked together. I hauled a bunch of tables over there for Emerson to use for a prom, brought them back over here. We're using this area night for prom. We've really learned over the years to kind of look at ourselves as partners in what we have to do as a district. And I would certainly hope that would be the same climate that would develop if we enter an annexation with Bradley. So at this point, I'll be glad to open it up to any questions that you may have. Mr. Lane?
You probably covered it, I didn't pick up on it. Why rush to do it this year as opposed to, if it's not mandated yet, wait and do it a year's time to work all the details?
That's a good question, and I did not cover that. What would be the logic of doing it now instead of waiting? The only thought I have on that is, and again, it's speculation. It's kind of like the old saying, a bird in the hand. I don't know a year from now if anything would change that might change this opportunity. And I don't know if a year from now, if the state doesn't change this particular funding mechanism. I mean, it's an appropriation that the legislature has to appropriate money for. And currently, it's available. I do know as far as the superintendent, I watch legislature every year. I do know this year there's a bill that's introduced to phase out isolated funding. That's a big funding mechanism for us, because we're one of the original isolated schools. Fortunately, it never got out of committee. So I watch things like that. And I'm sure they're like we are. If they have budget concerns and things that they look for places to cut, but there's not a good reason or a good answer to that question other than to say, I just know what this is available at this point in time. I can't say for sure it would be available next year. I don't think that any other district would become more attractive to Bradley than we are. far as a partner to annex with. I don't think that a year from now that we would be a second or third choice. I still think that we would be the best choice for Bradley. But that's about, I guess that's about the only way I can respond to that is I just know it's available to us now. Justin, I'm sorry.
I think you covered this, you talked about school choice, but just to make it clear, basically the district remained the same until legislature, whatever decides whether on school choice. If you lived in Bradley School District, come to Taylor or go to Emerson, or it would work that way, is that correct?
Let me, I'm glad you asked that because I want to try to clarify that. And I thought that question would come up, and here's my answer. No, yes, maybe. And I'll explain. If you ask the question, and for those of you that are watching legislative action, there is a bill before the legislature right now, Senate Bill 65. It was written by Senator Johnny Key of Mountain Home. It started out as a wide open school choice bill. Anybody go anywhere you want to go. Real simple language, even I could understand it. And if you're familiar with what school choice in Arkansas has been up until this bill was introduced, and really it still is we've had school choice in Arkansas, but there were certain restrictions, and one of those was a racial restriction. Bottom line, for Emerson-Taylor, we could accept any student under school choice except a Caucasian student. I mean, that's just the way it is. I know here we are, 21st century, that's not supposed to be, but that's the law. That law got struck down as unconstitutional. A federal judge ruled it unconstitutional, but then he stayed his own ruling, which means he kind of postponed it. It's still the current law, but it now goes to an appellate court if go to rule whether that means there is no school choice law at all, or just the racial part is thrown out. That's what they're trying to figure out now. Well, in the meantime, there have been several bills on school choice presented to the legislature. One of them just simply says, legislators don't do anything, just wait and see what the court does. And I thought that was pretty weak on the legislative part because they were elected to legislate, not the court. They were just wanting to punt. So that one didn't go anywhere. Another senator introduced one that still would, as long as it did not negatively impact racial balance in a school, well, that brings the racial part back into it, and the opinion on that was that would not meet constitutional muster. But this bill by Senator Key came out of the Education Committee with a do pass recommendation, went to the floor of the Senate, passed 34-0. There was one senator that abstained from voting. Went to the House Education Committee, has come out of the House Education Committee with a pass, goes to the House floor, and now all it needs is the House to pass it, governor to sign it, or leave it on his desk for 10 days. But I heard that there were going to be 2 amendments put on it. One was going to limit the loss of students to a school to 3%. And I'll just use Bradley since we're looking at that. That means with Bradley's enrollment, they could only lose 11 students to school choice. Now, I've already tried to put that in my mind, and I might get 0 requests for school choice out of Bradley. I might get 20. I have no idea what the residents of Bradley would do. But I do know if that amendment is put on that bill and passes, then we would be limited to accepting only 11. Of course, we have other conditions that we won't take a student if it's going to make us go over, exceed a class maximum, where we have to split the class. But we're about run out of classroom space anyway, but there are other considerations. The other was, it would exempt us, the Second Amendment would exempt any school that was under a federal desegregation order. And the only schools in Arkansas that I know of that's under a deseg order is Pulaski County and El Dorado. But again, I don't know. A lot of those desegregation orders go way back to the 60s, so they're 50, school choice up to anyone. That, my first answer was no, would not allow a Bradley, if we annex, would not allow Bradley to come to Taylor because that bill applies to out-of-district transfers. If we annex with Bradley, Bradley becomes in-district. So they're not a non-resident any longer. And I know it's kind of frustrating and confusing to think that if they weren't in our district, they would be eligible for school choice. But if they are in our district, they would not be eligible for school choice, at least not by the school choice law. That's the no answer. The yes answer is, are you eligible to? You are, because in-district transfers are allowable based on local policy, which means the school board would have the right to develop a policy that would address intra-district transfers. Now, it has to be well thought out because this thing is filled with traps and difficulties along the way. I wouldn't want one just wide open because then you got a student that, well, I'm mad at that math teacher, I'm going to Emerson. I'm mad at that coach, I'm going to Taylor. Or if they got a better ball team, I'm going over there. It has to be a legitimate reason. And we've talked about what could be some legitimate reasons. It really has not been a problem with Emerson-Taylor because of convenience. There's no place in Emerson that's closer to Taylor than it is Emerson. And there's no place in Taylor that's closer to Emerson than it is Taylor. So it'd be an inconvenience if you lived over here and say, well, I want to go to school at Taylor. Or if you lived in Emerson, Taylor, go to school at Emerson, or lived in Emerson, say, I want to go to school at Taylor. But that wouldn't necessarily be the case with Bradley because I realize there's some areas, especially out here at Walker Creek, that are very close to here and much farther away to Bradley. So, but that's something that the board would have to write. A policy, and all I can tell you is, as a patron of the school district, contact your board member and tell them what you would like, what you think would be a good policy. But it would have to be restrictive enough that it was a legitimate move. I mean, I could even envision someone that lived here, that worked over here, that drove through this part of the school district every day on their way to work and then back home. It might be very easy for them to drop their child off at school on their way to work and then pick their child back up on the way back home. That might be a great example. But it would have to be a sensible policy and not one that created some confusion with kids just wanting to bounce back and forth. And also keep in mind, we have to remember, and something the coaches would be really concerned about, we have to maintain eligibility because there are certain rules on if you move from one school to another, you may have to wait 365 days before you're eligible for any athletics. And if you played on that team and you're not eligible, and we've learned what that means, then you forfeit everything you played up to that point that you discovered. So, Bruce, would you have your hand up?
I was wondering if the population could vote to move the line within the district.
Do what now?
If you move your school district line, you vote to move your line, not be the
There is a method of moving district lines, and I've studied that law and read about it. It's kind of like a hostile takeover. What you have to do is you have to hold an election, and you have to get a majority of the ones that live in that area to petition another school to annex them in, annex the property. And again, it goes to the state board. And obviously, the school that's going to lose that area is probably going to object to it. And that makes it a bit more difficult. When everyone's in agreement for something, the state board's a little more inclined to proceed that direction. But when you have visible opposition, and I watched this a couple of months ago, I watched the state board, DeWitt School was trying to consolidate Gillette's schools, and the Gillette kindergarten through the 6th grade had dropped down to 75 students. That's how small they are. And the superintendent, I listened to his report for his kids at DeWitt, and the reason it caught my attention is that's where I started teaching my first 2 years at DeWitt. They were spending about $6,000 per student for the DeWitt kids and about $12,000 per student on the Gillette kids. And it was killing his budget. And there was a group of parents from Gillette just was firm against it, and the state board would not close it. So I was really surprised about that when I saw all the evidence that they put in front of the state board. I thought it was, and for those of you know that area, Gillette's not a long way from the Weed. I mean, it's just, that's straight up Highway 1, if I remember right. Highway is. I hope I answered the question. But there is a way to take over area. It's just not done very, very easily because places just don't want to give it up. And you'd have to get a big majority of the people. And let's say even if the parents with school-age kids wanted to do it, think of the numbers of people with no kids in school that's going to see their taxes go up 5.4 mils if they're annexed into that district, because then they become part of that district and their taxes are going to be the tax rate of that district. So I would guess to say that the majority, especially of your older population that do not have kids or grandkids in school, would probably not vote to support it. But I mean, I don't know that. It might they might think we increase the property values around the lake. Ms. McMahon and I were having a conversation the other day, and I was kind of quizzing her. I said, how many kids does it take to put on the bus to make it worthwhile? And we did a little calculations on it, and I said, at 20, I run a bus with 20 kids, because I know how much money I'm going to get from the state for those 20 students, and what it costs per mile to run a bus, and what it costs to pay a bus driver. But, you know, if this school choice stuff really opened up, you could even envision running buses to places not even in your district if you're going to bring up kids to school. Richard? Oh, I'm sorry.
We talked about sports earlier. What's the chances of Taylor picking up the football team?
I hope very slim.
How's that?
Well, and we're,
I'd really like to see more.
yeah, let's see, I saw Coach Frizzell in here a while ago. I think he coached football at one time. I said, he got up and walked out when that question was asked.
I volunteered to get it.
I know the schools that have started football, and the ones that didn't have football in the past started football. I watched Parker Chapel the last couple of years. They started football. And they started down there with junior high, and each year they added the grade till after a period of time they worked up to where they had a high school level team. Of course, they're a 3A school with probably pushing close to 1,000 kids, all on one campus. That's the key. And again, I am not promoting any form of consolidation. I'm just saying, if all of your high school kids, grades 7 through 12, were on one campus to where you could have a period for athletics and a coach could get them quick, that's, even for schools our size, that would be a struggle. Because even if all three of our, I'm saying our three, I'm making an assumption, you put all three of those together, you're still a 2A school. And there's not a lot of 2A football teams. There's some.
He don't play basketball or baseball, but, you know, he could sell great in football.
Right.
Or maybe even a soccer team.
That's, you know, and that's one of the, I'll be the first one to admit, one of the limitations of a small school. We've had kids come through here that probably could have benefited from a really good band program. And I'm not being critical of our music teachers, but when you have few kids, few voices, few instruments, it's not like when you've got an 80-member marching band out there. And we've had kids come through here that have talent, that have beautiful voices. I wish we had choral singers that they could have been a part of. But
I came from a real small school when I was growing up in elementary, and we had soccer, we had baseball, football. You know, it was just up to the coaches. You know, sometimes the coaches, they even, you know, coach baseball and football. You know, coaching role, but it gave the kids more things to do other than run the streets and get in trouble.
I agree. All of them are good programs. It's at some point you have to prioritize. If you can't do them all, just pick the ones that you can do. this last year, Lafayette County, and I think Lafayette County has enrolled about 700 kids, and all their high school kids are on one campus, and they dropped their football program this year because they didn't have enough kids to fill the team. So it'd be a very difficult thing for a school our size to have football. But if we have the numbers, and we got the money, kick off. I like to watch good football game. It's just really hard for a 1A school to have. I don't know of any 1A schools in the state of Arkansas with football. And there's a few.
More programs for the school, you know, so our kids can do those things, you know, rather than, you know, riding around and not doing nothing. You know, we don't have a park or, you know, nothing for these kids to do other than, when they get out of school, you know, at 3, they got nothing to do unless they play baseball or basketball.
We have had a few kids over the years that ran track. We had a really outstanding individual that might, I mean, we could try to work that, and then, we offer track over at Emerson, and we've had some students from over Taylor go over there and run track, so if they're interested in track, we try to help you make that happen. Anyone else have a question? I want to answer, I want you to walk out of here at least with a clear mind.
Why annex and not consolidate?
Because really annexation is a much simpler process, because, you know, like I said, the biggest advantage is for really our staff, because if it comes down to a reduction in force at some point, the school that's been annexed, they take the lowest end of the seniority. But again, if we don't close the campus, I don't foresee, I think regular attrition, retirement, taking other jobs, I think that'll take care of most of those. But in a school that really annexed and you close the campus, the ones you bring in, those are the most vulnerable at contract renewal. They have a contract that first year, but after that, there's no guarantees. But your staff gets preference for reemployment above the school that's been annexed in. But I don't see staffing as a problem for either campus. Now there are some duplications that the state will only allow you to have one of something. I'll use an example, test coordinator. Every school district has to have a test coordinator, and you just have one. Well, I'm sure they have a test coordinator, we have a test coordinator. When we come together, or if we come together, we can still only have one, so that's not a full-time job, that's just a supplement to something we already do. So at some point, someone may lose a few, maybe an additional responsibility that they got paid a little extra money for. But that's going to be part of it. Taylor went up 0.9. At the time, Emerson was 33.9, we were 33. And that very next election, we passed a new tax rate, and Iowa went up 0.9. Well, the law says you have to try to unify, but the overriding law is the voter law, which is you have to pass it. But I mean, I remember it passed at both places. Do I think it'll pass it, Brandon? I don't, be honest with you, Bruce, I don't know. Yeah. I hope the majority of people will think that's what we need to do. I mean, I kind of had this discussion over at Emerson. There was an interesting statement by a gentleman said, well, I would really feel bad about voting their tax up. And I said, you're not voting their tax up, you're voting your tax for your kids. And that's the cost of educating your child. We would. Well, when you walk in there, you get one vote. That counts for everybody. What I said was, The vote will either pass or fail. Let me just use an example. Let's say between Emerson and Taylor and Bradley, 1,000 people vote all together. They're going to count all of those as one big vote. If you get 501 that vote for it, it passes, theirs goes up. It's not going to be their count Taylor and then count Emerson, that just applies there. It's one big pot. But well, I guess what I'm saying is, since yours is not going to change either way, pass or fail, then what I don't want you to do is say, well, since it doesn't matter, I'm not going to bother to go over there and vote, because it doesn't change me. But I do want you to vote because we're educating your kids. You're paying to educate your kids. That's exactly what I think. But what I said, when you close that curtain, it's what's in your mind. But I would hope, if this thing was reversed, as a superintendent, if I was advising Taylor and this was reversed and we were going to them, I would say, when we have this election, we need to vote for that because that's the cost. If we're going to be in this system, that's the cost of being in the system. Well, we had to vote. And if it had failed, we would have stayed at 33 over here, and Emerson would have stayed at 33.9. But fortunately, it passed. It wasn't even close. Anyone else? One thing I would certainly like for you to do, and again, I'll continue to answer the question, but if I don't think about it for a second before you leave, if you have strong convictions about this, let your board member know. And let me know if you have strong convictions about it. Dr. Lyon?
That's going to be a pretty big jump for some of those farmers that are out and wait. Their price pretty high on their land. So it'll be a big jump for them. They're going to have to really want to.
You're right, but also think about it this way. If something doesn't change and their numbers go down, they're going somewhere. Unless the legislature comes in and changes that 350 number. And there was one bill written this year to put a 2-year moratorium on it to study. They wanted to study to see what has it done to transportation of kids. It never got out of the committee. So the governor has made it plain he has no desire to reduce that 350 number. There was another bill that was introduced this year to allow a school district to include homeschool kids in that number, even though they don't go to your school. If they're in your district and they're being homeschooled, you can include those. It never got out of the committee. That told me there's no desire on the legislature and the powers to be up there to really affect that 350 number. I say that to say this: if nothing changes for Bradley, 2 or 3 years from now, they're going to have to go somewhere. If they go to Phelps' rate is 49 meals. Ours is 37. Now, Lafayette County, I think theirs is somewhere 33, right in there. They're not much above Brandon, but we're we're below the state average on millage. I know it's 37 sounds like our millage is real high, but we're below the state average. So, I mean, Phelps would be really expensive for them if they went that way. Yes. Jim, over the years, I know I've had a lot of people over there contact me about school choice, and then when I tell them legally I can, then they ask me, is there any other way? And I said, well, schools can grant transfers, but that is controlled by the resident district. Your resident district has to release you before a non-resident district can accept you. Unlike school choice, just the receiving school takes you whether the resident district likes it or not. They have never granted a transfer. Yeah, I know.
But my point is, there's not been any discussion with that school board over there that they would release these kids who would come out here.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure they discussed it, and their answer is no.
There's going to be one school board out in the second inning.
That's exactly right.
So can it be the
Well, it wouldn't be any need for a transfer, then you just have to develop a local policy. You know, like I talked about a while ago. If the school board, the new interim board, said, all right, we're gonna write a policy for intra-district transfer or choice and set certain conditions, then they could do that under that policy. But that has to be done by the school board. It's not done by law, it's not done by the superintendent. It would have to be written by the board. That's why I'd say you as a taxpaying patron, talk to your school board member and say, this is what I'd like. This is what I'd like to see. Do what? Oh, Scott, there's a lot of ways you're hurt. I mean, obviously there wouldn't be hurt on money because the same money would stay in the same district.
I guess that's what I meant, financially.
It wouldn't affect them at all. Other than if let's say 50 kids left Bradley. Well, somebody's gonna lose their job. Well, they'll have to come over here. So, I mean, we'd have to put on people. And start with, we couldn't take 50 people over here anyway. We don't have that room. But over time, you know, you might be able to do some things. But they would also be losing ball players and kids involved in different activities. So it's, I mean, it'd be the same thing if we had 50 kids here that wanted to go somewhere else. It would affect us in more ways than just finances.
How do you think the school board membership would break down? Right now, I think y'all are 4 and 3 members. What would it be?
No, it's, we're a 5-member board right now. I've got three that live in the old Emerson side, 2 that live over here. We'll take 2 from Bradley. For the first year. After that, we have to rezone. And depending on who runs in that zone, and there's no doubt in my mind, I've done this rezoning. It's almost impossible to make all of your zones fall inside those old lines. There'll be some zones that spill over. There could be a zone that was part of it in Walker's Creek, part of it over here in Taylor. And I mean, if you've ever looked at congressional districts and senatorial districts, you could gerrymander a line that started in Bradley and ended up in Emerson if you wanted to draw it that way. And there's a couple of other constraints within that Voter Rights Act, and one of them is if you can create a majority minority zone, you have to. So that's something we have to look at would be our minority population, where they are, and if by drawing a line a certain way, you can create a majority minority, then by law you have to create that zone. And I'm sure that would be at least one of our zones.
What does that mean?
Minority would be anything other than Caucasian. If you have populations of voters that I'll use Taylor as an example. We don't, with the old Taylor zone, I know we don't any longer. At one time we did. But if you could go out in parts of this town, and then go down in parts out here, and in certain parts where you have populations of minorities, you can draw it. Again, it may look like a curlicue before you get through, but you wrap all that up in one zone, then you look at your demographics. If the majority of those residents are minority, then you have created a majority-minority zone. You can see why I would not make a good politician. I don't think that way. It's a little confusing. But that goes back to the Voter Rights Act of 1965, and we have to observe that. And there's no doubt that we would have at least one majority-minority zone. And again, if you had to draw parts of Bradley and parts of Taylor and even parts of Emerson to create that, you have to do that with your zone. I don't think it would go that far. I think it'd be pretty easy probably to create a majority-minority zone, fairly condensed out of our district. But more than likely, there would be some zones that spill over from maybe what we call the Bradley School District into Taylor, and there, we already have a zone that's part of Walkerville that comes over across the creek into Taylor. I mean, we've had that ever since we rezoned, so that's not unusual. But you have to remember, we may think of where the old lines are, or were, but the state board doesn't think of that. They just see one big area. And if it kind of puts you, gives you a little bit of concept, if we annex, we become a school district of about 500, little over 500 square miles. Sounds like a real big one, but I mentioned DeWitt a while ago, they're the biggest one in the state, they're 900 square miles. So, yes.
If the annex happens, will the board strive to bring in, more qualified teachers in high school and graduate?
Well, I mean, we always try to hire the best people we can hire. I mean, I can tell you that.
I know, like, get rid of the.
Well, I start with you, you're kind of asking me a question there that I don't even know who their staff are. I've not seen evaluations. I mean, we're moving way beyond. I know it's always been our policy here and our practice. If you can't perform,
I'm not talking about any of the teacher pieces, I'm talking about like trying to get rid of the DLC and bring teachers in.
get rid of what?
The distance learning.
Compressed video, that's changing anyway. The compressed video where you sit there and watch the instructor on the TV. I've not looked at their schedule. I don't know how many courses they teach there. We teach, I know we do a couple of them here. And, from one opinion may be like to get rid of all those. I've got some over here who wants us to do more because we've got kids graduating. How many hours of college credit are we graduating with?
27 to 30.
We got kids at 30 hours, you'd be classified as a sophomore, wouldn't you? And most of that we're getting through, or a lot of that we're getting through the distance learning. So we've got a lot of parents over here that wish we did more because it doesn't cost their kids anything to take those classes, does it? I didn't think it did. So they're getting college hours free. And I know for years we had to teach some classes because we could not find a certified teacher in those areas. So we're going to do what we have to do to meet standards. But going back to what you said, we always try to hire the best people that we can. Yeah, I see what you're saying now on the distance learning. But the state, that's changing. It's going to an online delivery. They want it to mimic online college courses, and they're requiring every school to teach at least one class online. And that's coming up. Anyone else? I mean, I'll stay here as long as you want to and answer any questions that you have. I didn't think to at the beginning of it. I know one board member, Greg Sanders, and here, and I see Mr. Herring, our board president, back